What's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today we are going to talk about Khamzat Chimaev's win over Dricus Du Plessis and why I truly think it's a good win. Don't get me wrong, but it is not as impressive as a lot of people are making it out to be. And there is one stat that really, truly bleeds me to this, and it's the striking stat between these two individuals, and I'm going to get into that later in this video. Khamzat Chimaev decimated Dricus Du Plessis in this fight, 5-round decision, and ultimately couldn't get the finish done in this fight. And yes, he did win, but it wasn't the most impressive title fight performance I have ever seen. This is one of those weird case scenarios where you have dominance, but it's not necessarily impressive in a way. We're going to dive deeper into what I mean by that later in this video. If you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That's a way to help the channel grow. And guys, sorry for not talking about UFC 319 any sooner. I was just moving, and I am finally settled in enough to really make a video. Now, let's jump into Khamzat Chimaev beating Dricus Du Plessis and of why it wasn't that impressive in my opinion. So Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 319 beat Dricus Du Plessis pretty handily. And I want to make it very clear that it was impressive in that regard that he did win this fight fairly easily due to his wrestling credentials and all that different type of stuff. And I truly don't think Dricus Du Plessis, you know, he thought that he was going to be okay against Khamzat Chimaev. And as we all know, we think Khamzat is one of the best wrestlers in UFC history. Not even we think, we know he is one of the best wrestlers in UFC history. But the one thing that really is interesting in this fight was how much damage Khamzat Chimaev inflicted per strike he threw, rather the lack of damage he inflicted per strike thrown. Dricus Du Plessis, obviously, after the fight, looked beat up, but considering that he took in 529 total strikes, the most total strikes in a UFC fight ever thrown by one side, is unreal to see his face and his body that well off. And when we move a little bit further down, this shows it right here, this stat, significant strikes. Khamzat Chimaev, 37 significant strikes out of his 529. Now, I am not someone who is an absolute mathematic and can do this off the top of my head, but when we look at how, you know, what the percentage of significant strikes were thrown in this fight, it is actually kind of crazy to say that only 7% of the strikes that Khamzat threw were significant. 7 strikes out of each 100 strikes that he threw were significant. That's unreal in this fight, considering of how dominant Khamzat had position. Now, first, third, and fifth round, I believe, and maybe even the fourth round, he had that crucifix locked in. DDP couldn't do anything. It was like an absolute blanket on top of him. And Khamzat was controlling this fight really handily all the way through until that fifth round, where DDP was able to get on top and almost submit him. Not in like a really close submission, but definitely the only Dricus' closest point to winning this fight. I always thought the plot armor was going to pull through there, but Khamzat Chimaev, yes, it was very impressive what he was able to do, but he landed 12 takedowns on Dricus. Really good number, obviously impressive. The first, he was shooting every single round, probably about 10 to 30 seconds into the round and getting the fight to the ground in his own little world, which no one's going to be able to beat him at. But the really, like I said, the big thing is the striking numbers. Now, what could have Khamzat done to make this a little bit different? Because like I was talking about before, in the crucifix position, Khamzat wasn't able to really get the leverage needed to really wail on Dricus. Dricus wasn't necessarily trying to get out. Rather, he couldn't get out and was stuck there. So Dricus' plan in that moment was just to turn his head to the left into Chimaev. Now, this was kind of a very weird stylistic thing that Dricus was doing because Khamzat was really unable to punch Dricus because his head was turned into him, but the back of his head was showing, and that's a little manipulation of the rules right there. But Dricus was obviously taking damage in this slot, but it looked like someone was like knocking on his head like you would knock on a door, rather than someone like, you know, punching through your head. Not saying it's exactly like knocking on a door, because those strikes were definitely a lot harder and I wouldn't want to take them, but Dricus wasn't exactly being rattled by every single shot that was being thrown. Khamzat was just trying to inflict as much damage as possible. Now, I want to be clear, pretty much every single round besides the fifth round should have been a 10-8. The reason I say that is because Khamzat Chimaev had position and he did enough damage through the, you know, inconsequential strikes by power that he threw. Rather, there was just so many of them that they just added up to more. And Dricus, more importantly, did nothing. That is what signifies a 10-8 round, is your opponent not being able to do really anything. Because there's a lot of individuals who could say that fights are 10-8 rounds because this guy absorbs so much damage, but Dricus Du Plessis wasn't able to throw back on Khamzat. And no matter how one-sided the fight was, Khamzat not allowing Dricus to throw back or even give him an opportunity to get up, which was a very impressive grappling, Khamzat was able to capture what I thought should have been a 10-8 round all up until the 5th round ended. But the big thing that really surprised me about this fight is I truly thought if Khamzat would get this fight to the ground, he would choke out DDP. And that is the little, not concerning thing, but just a little bit mind-boggling to me in this position, is Khamzat Chimaev had 0 sub-attempts, according to the UFC. Now, he was definitely sliding in the arms to try to get the rear naked choke, and he tried to go for the arm triangle, I believe, at one point, but this is, I think, for 2 factors. One, I think in the first round, Khamzat was really able to get into that crucifix pretty early, and that really stopped him from progressing. Not saying he couldn't have progressed, but he was in such a dominant position he didn't need to progress, which kind of allows him to not go for the submission. And then as the fight kept going, Dricus kept getting sweatier, and as well, Dricus's BJJ looked really good in this fight, and that's something to credit Dricus with, is to say that he looked really good stopping the submissions on the ground and really be able to weather the storm while on the ground against Khamzat, because I truly think that someone not as high level as Dricus would have got submitted pretty easily in this fight, because Dricus was doing everything to play the fight as safe as possible. Now, I do think that also, going back to the Khamzat side, I think that he had to play this performance a little less impressive than a lot of, especially me, thinking of, because Dricus was playing it so sound and he just had to go for a position in a lot of time, and that's not Khamzat's fault in the regard. Obviously, he wasn't happy after the fight with the results. He wanted to get a submission victory in there somewhere, but Chimaev ultimately is one of the best grapplers in the UFC. I just wish I saw a little bit more effort to try to get the submission, try to bait Dricus in some regard, because the only thing that was missing from an absolutely stellar performance was the fact that Khamzat Chimaev didn't get the finish. And that is why my statement of it's not as impressive to me as a lot of other people is, even though he was able to throw and land 529 strikes, only 37 of those were significant, which is a crazy margin for these for there to be between these guys, between the strikes. Obviously, Dricus Du Plessis, 13 significant strikes, 45 total strikes. It's still a wide margin, but a lot closer than Khamzat in that fight, even though Khamzat landed more. And I'm just sitting here, and I truly do think that Khamzat Chimaev is going to have a very dominant title reign in the UFC middleweight division. I mean, the only guy I could possibly see beating him if he got better would be Anthony Hernandez, but I don't know if I would. I wouldn't go there right now. Obviously, I'm picking Khamzat to beat everyone. I don't think he beats someone like Hernandez possibly, but I have him over Adesanya. I have him over Strickland. I have him over both Borjalho and Imavov. Have him over RDR. I have him over Hernandez. Like, I got him over everyone just because of how dominant that wrestling is. But ultimately, I do hope that Khamzat Chimaev rolls around at UFC 321, co-main event to Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane. And I truly do think that Khamzat Chimaev's win was impressive, but not as groundbreaking as everyone was talking about it being. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think down below in regards to this fight. Now, I want to say very clearly that this was a very impressive performance by Khamzat Chimaev, but compared to how much output and how much just noise it's getting around the world, I do think that Chimaev's performance was a little bit overrated for the fact that he didn't land a lot of significant strikes and that he wasn't able to pull off the submission. Now, submissions can be hard to get, and the significant strikes were kind of hampered due to the positions Khamzat was put in and forced to be in, considering Dricus was playing so safe in this fight. But also, more importantly, I do think that Dricus was doing a great job on the ground, being able to fight off the takedowns. He did a terrible job stopping the takedowns, but fighting off the chokes, fighting off the submissions, Dricus did a great job. But like I said, I don't see Khamzat losing his belt anytime soon. I do think that there's a couple people who would put up interesting fights, but I don't think it would be something absolutely crazy. But thank you guys for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. Please let me know what you think about in the comment section about the UFC 319 card, what you think about Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev, and what you think is next for Khamzat and what you think is next for Dricus. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.